Back in 1919, the streets of Tehran, the Iranian capital, rang with pro-American slogans. More than a century later, a different cry echoes in the streets of Tehran: death to America. Fearing a communist tilt and also under pressure from the British, the CIA launched Operation Ajax in 1953. Mossadegh was overthrown. The Shah returned, more dependent than ever on the United States. Khomeini became the voice of a revolution, fusing Islamic ideology with fiery anti-imperialist rhetoric. The military, once fiercely loyal, began to fracture. On January 16, 1979, the Shah fled the country. The monarchy was dismantled. The Islamic Republic was born. Till now, the US-Iran conflict was marked by conventional concerns. But the 1990s brought in a completely different challenge. The 1990s ushered in a new chapter, focused now on Iran's nuclear ambitions. Iran, having acquired centrifuge designs and components through the AQ Khan network of Pakistan, began discreetly developing its nuclear capabilities. The US, alarmed, imposed sanctions. President Bill Clinton's administration took the lead, targeting Iran's energy sector and cracking down on its alleged support for Hezbollah and Hamas. But not everything was confrontational. In 1998, President Mohammad Khatami extended an olive branch, calling for a dialogue between civilizations. In a landmark CNN interview with Christiane Amanpour, he impressed Americans by expressing admiration for America's culture. A new opening seemed possible. Clinton's Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright, publicly acknowledged the US role in the 1953 coup. Then, after the 9/11 attacks, Iran and the United States even worked together to stabilize Afghanistan, jointly backing the Bonn Agreement to shape the post-Taliban order in Kabul. Things started looking much better in the autumn of 2001, but hopes were short-lived. In 2002, President George Bush included Iran in the axis of evil, accusing it of harboring terrorists and pursuing weapons of mass destruction. That same year, revelations emerged about undeclared Iranian nuclear facilities in Natanz and Arak, and the fragile truce collapsed. In 2005, hardliner Mahmoud Ahmadinejad was elected president. His inflammatory rhetoric, Holocaust denial, and aggressive nuclear stance alarmed the West. Iran resumed uranium enrichment, flouting UN resolutions. The US responded with the Iran Freedom Support Act, seeking regime change. A 2007 American intelligence report found that Iran had likely halted its nuclear weapons program in 2003, but enrichment continued, so sanctions intensified. And then came another turning point. In 2013, moderate Hassan Rouhani was elected the president of Iran. And a year later, Iran and 6 world powers, including the United States, began negotiations that led to the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, the JCPOA, also known as the Iran Nuclear Deal. Signed in 2015 under President Barack Obama, the deal limited Iran's uranium enrichment to 3.67% and drastically reduced its stockpile. In return, international sanctions were lifted. The International Atomic Energy Agency confirmed Iran's compliance multiple times. It was the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in decades. But the opposition was fierce. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu called the deal a historic mistake. In the US, the Republicans, led by Donald Trump, criticized it for being too lenient. When Trump became president in 2017, the deal's days were numbered. In May 2018, the US formally withdrew from the JCPOA. A maximum pressure campaign followed, reimposing sanctions and further isolating Iran. In response, Iran resumed higher levels of enrichment, setting off a new nuclear crisis. In January 2020, tensions exploded. The US assassinated General Qasem Soleimani, commander of Iran's Quds force, in a drone strike in Baghdad. Iran retaliated with missile attacks on US bases in Iraq. During this chaos, Iran accidentally shot down a Ukrainian airliner, killing 176 people. By now, Iran was deeply involved in regional proxy conflicts. Its support for Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthi rebels in Yemen made it the primary antagonist in Washington's Middle East strategy. In October 2023, the Middle East was jolted by one of the bloodiest attacks in decades. Hamas launched a sudden and brutal offensive against Israel, killing over 1,300 people. It was a moment of deep trauma for Israel and a wake-up call for the region. No direct evidence tied Iran to the planning of the operation, but few doubted Tehran's broader influence. Iran's long-standing support for Hamas, financial, logistical, and ideological, was now back in the spotlight. In Washington, the Biden administration moved quickly. It revived the Negev Forum, which was an alliance of regional and Western partners focused on countering Iran's expanding missile and drone capabilities. Behind the scenes, the US was also coordinating closely with Israel and its Gulf allies, wary of a wider escalation. But in April 2024, the conflict took a sharp and dangerous turn. Following Israeli airstrikes on Iranian targets in Syria, Iran retaliated with a wave of missile and drone attacks directly on Israeli territory. The message from Tehran was clear. Further provocation would not go unanswered. Israel responded, but not as expected. For the first time in history, it struck targets inside Iran itself. It was a watershed moment and the beginning of a new phase of open confrontation. Then came January 2025. Donald Trump returned to power, beginning his second term in the White House.
Congratulations, Mr. Trump.
Despite his reputation for hardline rhetoric, Trump surprised many by opening the door to diplomacy. His new Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff, a close ally from the private sector, was tasked with a delicate mission: reinitiate nuclear talks with Iran. Witkoff engaged Iran's foreign minister Abbas Araghchi through Omani mediators. Early meetings took place in Oman and Italy. A temporary framework was floated, a 60-day pause in nuclear enrichment in return for modest sanctions relief. Iran refused. Its leaders made it clear uranium enrichment was non-negotiable. It was a matter of sovereignty and pride. Still, the talks continued. There were cautious signals that progress might be possible, but that hope was short-lived. By March, Benjamin Netanyahu was laying the groundwork for a full-scale strike on Iran's nuclear facilities. Western intelligence agencies, the British, American, and French, they warned their governments. This wasn't a symbolic strike or a pressure tactic. Netanyahu appeared to be preparing a sweeping military operation, one that could destabilize or even bring down the Iranian regime. And crucially, Israel seemed prepared to act alone. That put President Trump in a tough spot. He had publicly committed to a diplomatic solution. He had just spent months rejecting military options. There was no new intelligence suggesting Iran was close to building a bomb. And yet, here was Netanyahu pressing forward, determined to strike. In late May, during a tense phone call between the two leaders, Trump tried to draw a red line. He warned that unilateral action could derail negotiations and plunged the region into chaos. But privately, he and his advisors were weighing their options. Should the US stand aside? Or should it join the offensive? Or should it find a way to influence the outcome from behind the scenes? Ultimately, Trump chose a middle path. He refused to endorse the strikes publicly, but behind closed doors, he authorized covert support. American intelligence and surveillance resources were discreetly passed along to Israel's military. Then, in early June, Israel launched its attack. The operation was extensive and deadly. It killed senior Iranian military commanders, it wiped out major weapons production facilities and key infrastructure tied to the nuclear program. In the days that followed, Trump's position evolved. At first, he remained measured. Then, he began to praise the operation. He called it a brilliant success, a decisive blow, and eventually he claimed partial credit, telling aides that he had been far more involved than people realized. He framed the strikes not as an Israeli move, but as a coordinated effort to send Iran a clear message. But within his own administration and within his MAGA base, tensions flared. Supporters like Tucker Carlson and Steve Bannon vocally criticized American involvement. Director of National Intelligence Tulsi Gabbard told Congress that there was no evidence that Iran was actively building a nuclear weapon. But Trump publicly rebuked her. He said, "I don't care what she said. I believe the Iranians were very close to having one." Then, on June 22nd, everything escalated once again. The United States launched its own direct military strikes on Iranian soil. B-2 Spirit bombers flew out of the Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, flew non-stop for 37 hours, and dropped their 30,000-pound bombs over the heavily fortified underground facilities in Fordo, central to Iran's uranium enrichment program. Simultaneously, American submarines fired dozens of cruise missiles at strategic targets in Natanz and Isfahan. Within hours, the White House declared that Iran's nuclear program had been completely destroyed. For Trump, the strikes marked a restoration of American dominance in the Middle East. In a televised address to the nation, he said the goal was the total elimination of Iran's enrichment capacity, and he labeled Iran
The bully of the Middle East must now make peace. If they do not, future attacks will be far greater and a lot easier.
Trump declared it a historic moment. He told supporters, "We are the only ones with the capability to do this." He invoked his peace through strength doctrine, a belief that overwhelming force would pave the way for eventual diplomacy. He even claimed that the strikes could lead to eventual reconciliation between Iran and Israel. But Iran was in no mood to talk. President Masoud Pezeshkian, wounded during an Israeli strike just days earlier, he convened a meeting of the National Security Council, and the response was swift and unified. Talks were suspended indefinitely. 5 rounds of indirect negotiations with the US, quietly underway since February, were halted. On July 5th, Supreme Leader Ayatollah Khamenei, who retreated to a secure underground bunker fearing Israeli attacks, reappeared and vowed to continue the fight with Israel and the United States. And on July 14th, Iran's foreign ministry issued a formal statement. Iran would not resume talks without firm assurances. There was no agreement on time, place, or agenda for future dialogue. More dramatically, Iran announced that it was suspending all cooperation with the UN nuclear inspectors. This marked a serious breach of the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, an agreement Iran had been party to for decades. Meanwhile, Russia and China offered to act as mediators, but no breakthrough was in sight. Back in Washington, Trump floated a possible way forward. He suggested that sanctions could be lifted, but only if Iran dismantled all remaining nuclear infrastructure and agreed to full-scale inspection by international monitors. But the Iranian response was clear: absolutely not. Instead of concessions, Tehran signaled defiance. It accused the US of acting as an aggressor, not a negotiator. So, nearly a month after the attacks, Iran has not returned to talks. The threat of renewed escalation still remains high. And the diplomatic channels that once held the region back from the brink are now largely silent. Yet, Trump and Witkoff insist diplomacy isn't dead. They say discussions, both direct and indirect, are still underway. Diplomacy may still offer a way out, but that window is narrowing. On July 16, the Europeans warned that UN sanctions will be reinstated if no nuclear agreement is reached by August 29. From admiration to animosity, from revolution to confrontation, this is the trajectory of US-Iran relations. A history defined by idealism, betrayal, ambition, and misjudgment. What happens next may hinge not only on diplomatic efforts, but also on whether the lessons of history are finally learned.